Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I'm Rajat Sanyal of the Department of Archaeology, and our today's theme will be to discuss issues on the Brahmi script, the earliest known script of India, its decipherment, its origin, the theories concerning its origin, and its characteristic features. These will be our basic learning objectives, because Brahmi is the earliest script of India. We have to know how this name came to be known to the scholars, that this particular script is Brahmi. We have to consider terminological issues, how the nomenclatures of different Brahmi scripts of different periods came into existence in academics. And then we'll have to look briefly at the antiquity of the script, and then also the decipherment of the script, how the script was deciphered in the early 19th century, then the origin theories, and finally the characteristic features of the script. As we know, Brahmi is the principal script of all the four scripts that were used in the Ashokan inscriptions. What were these four scripts? These were Brahmi, Kharoshthi, Greek, and Aramaic. Brahmi was used for writing the Indian Prakrit language. Kharoshthi was used for writing what is called Gandhari Prakrit, which was the lingua franca of the Gandhara region. The Greek script was used for writing a few Greek inscriptions that are found in the northwestern part of Ashoka's dominion. And then we have some Aramaic inscriptions, again in those parts of the subcontinent. But of all these, Brahmi is the most widely used script in Ashokan inscriptions. If we look at the Brahmi script, at the top we can see the normalized version of the script as it should look like, and at the bottom we can see the famous Rumindai pillar inscription, the best preserved, one of the best preserved inscriptions of the Ashokan period. If we look at the name Brahmi, and if we try to understand how we came to know why is this particular script called Brahmi, the issue of nomenclature is very important. According to Indian Brahmanical tradition, the Brahmi script was an invention of the creator god Brahma. We have several literary references that Brahma's wife or his daughter Saraswati, she was also associated closely with the system of or the practice of writing. So in sculptures you have images of the goddess Saraswati with a book in hand. The Buddhist and Jain traditions, they reflect a rather more precise and categorical evidence of the name. And among all the Buddhist sources, one text stands out as it gives a precise list of scripts prevalent in early India. The name of the script is Lalitavistara. Also in the Jain texts, we have some references to sometimes 18 or 16 lists. Of these texts, the Pannavana Sutta and the Samavayanga Sutta are major. We may now take a closer look at the evidence of the Lalitavistara. The 10th chapter of this book, called Lipi Shala Sangdarshana Parivarta. This has a list of 64 scripts, of which the major ones are Brahmi, Kharoshthi, and then some names of regional scripts like Puskarasari, Angalipi, Vangalipi, and Magadalipi. But the first two names are very important for us. One is Brahmi and the second one is Kharoshthi, the two actual scripts of which we have clear idea of their existence, their geographical distribution, and their chronological attributes. A Chinese Buddhist text, on the other hand, it's an encyclopedic text called Fa Yuan Shulin. It has again a list of some scripts, but it does not record the names of the scripts. It records, on the contrary, the direction in which these scripts were written. And if we see this list, we find that it records that the first script of the list is written from left to right, while the second script of the list is written from right to left. This is very interesting. Now, how do we corroborate these two evidences? If we look at Lalitavistara, as you can see here, you have the first name as Brahmi. And if you look at the Chinese text, you have the first text written from left to right. Again, in the Lalitavistara, the second name is Kharoshthi, and in the Chinese text, the second script is written from right to left. And we have two major Indian scripts. One is Brahmi and one is Kharoshthi. After these were deciphered, we came to know that Brahmi is written from left to right and Kharoshthi from right to left. So we can clearly corroborate the evidence of the Buddhist and the Chinese texts to show that this script is Brahmi and this one is Kharoshthi. That's how we came to know about the names of the scripts in precise terms. Earlier scholars like E. Wultz and others, they believed that there were three stages, they rightly believed so, that there were three stages of development of Brahmi, and they named it in terms of dynastic terminologies like the Mauryan Brahmi or the Ashokan Brahmi initially, and then Mauryan Brahmi. And then the middle phase was termed the Kushana Brahmi, and the later phase was termed Gupta Brahmi, because at that point of time, from the mid-19th till the early 20th century, they were looking into scripts in terms of their dynastic attributions. That's why they termed it in terms of the dynasties under which these scripts appeared. But later, as late as 1970-71, D.C. Sarkar wrote his pioneering article on an introduction to Indian epigraphy and paleography. And there he suggested that he actually suggested this a little earlier, but that was the precise statement that D.C. Sarkar made in that particular article, that instead of looking into the development of script in terms of their dynastic attributes, we should look at more generic and general terminologies. For example, he said, when we are talking about the earliest form of Brahmi script, as we see in the Ashokan inscriptions, we should call them early Brahmi and not Ashokan or Maurya Brahmi, because from the 3rd century till the 1st century BCE, all these Brahmi scripts were written in different inscriptions, not only Ashoka or the other Mauryan inscriptions, but also the other contemporary inscriptions. Similarly, what Wultz and other people called Kushana Brahmi was, according to Sarkar rightly, that were written not only for writing, were used not only for writing Kushana inscriptions, but also for writing other contemporary inscriptions by the Shakas and other ruling lineages of different parts of the country and the private donors of northern India and even Deccan. Same is true for the Gupta period. So finally, Sarkar suggested that we should start with a new terminological setup with early Brahmi as the earliest form as found in the Ashokan inscriptions, then middle Brahmi, and then late Brahmi. Now, the major issue of the antiquity of Brahmi, which is the major historical writing system of India, if we keep aside the extraneous Kharoshthi. Now we know, after the discovery of the Harappa civilization, that the earliest script of India was that used in a number of Harappan seals that have so far been discovered from different Harappan sites. And the earliest historical script of India is Brahmi. So the Harappan script is the protohistoric system, and the historical system is represented by the Brahmi script. If we look at the literary sources on the Antiquity of the Brahmi Script, we find that Panini used the word lipi in denoting a script. Oscar von Hindenburg opined so because the region Panini came from, he argues, is northwestern India, and in that region Panini could have been familiar only with some Aramaic script, probably Khoroshthi and not Brahmi. If we look at the literary evidences of the Buddhist tradition, we find that the Jatakas and the Vinaya Pitaka contains several explicit references to writing, particularly of official documents. In the classical literature also, we find that there are several references to writing or not writing. For example, Megasthenes suggested that Indians knew writing, but his contemporary Nearchos wrote that Indians did not know the art of writing. Again, Strabo quotes Nearchos and further suggests that no, Indians did not know writing. So even in the classical statements, there are some contradictions about the practice of writing before the Ashokan period. Now if we turn to the archaeological evidence on the antiquity of the script, we find that some scholars have proposed connection of the script with the Harappan script. Mahasthan and Sahogoda inscriptions, one of those early inscriptions close to the date of the Ashokan inscriptions, have been proposed as epigraphic precursors of the Ashokan inscription, and there has been some recent claim about pre-Ashokan Brahmi on the basis of some evidence, some interesting evidence from a site called Anuradhapura in Sri Lanka. We'll come to those in detail. Now if we turn to the missing link issue, B.B. Lal suggested, on the basis of his discovery of some pottery remains from a site called Vikramkhol in Odisha, that these inscribed, according to him, these inscribed pottery are missing links between the Harappan and the historical Brahmi script. He believed that the marks or symbols that appear on these pottery shards are basically the precursors of what we find in the Ashokan edicts. But Richard Solomon rightly argued that these are basically graffiti or rather pseudo inscriptions, and they cannot be generally accepted as missing link between the protohistoric and the historical writings. We were just talking about the epigraphic precursor. These are the early records. At the top is the Sahogoda copper plate. At the bottom left is the famous Piprawa relic casket, where we have some early occurrences of Brahmi. Earlier scholars, they suggested that these are pre-Ashokan Brahmi scripts. The same was the case with the Mahasthan inscription, which was found from Bengal. But Ahmed Hassan Dani, in his pioneering work on Indian paleography, clearly demonstrated that the paleographic features of these inscriptions suggest rather these were not even contemporary to Ashokan inscriptions. These were a little later in date in Ashoka than the Ashokan inscriptions. Probably most of these so-called pre-Ashokan inscriptions were dated in the 2nd century BC, that is after Ashoka. So these were either near contemporary or later than the Ashokan inscription, but these were not pre-Ashokan or epigraphic precursors of the Ashokan Brahmi script. Now if we turn to the interesting archaeological evidence that came in 1996, it was A.4 Olchin and Robin Cunningham who excavated a site, the famous site of Anuradhapura in Sri Lanka. From stratified layers of that site, they came across some inscribed shards, and they suggested that these should be taken as proper evidence of pre-Ashokan Brahmi because the layers from which they hailed were dated prior to the 3rd century BC. Actually, these were dated between the 6th and the 4th century BC. So they suggested that these pottery remains should also be dated to that period and the inscriptions on them obviously to the same period. These are the evidences from Anuradhapura and another site called Tisamarama, but at least in the Tisamarama case we can see that these are not proper inscriptions. These are basically graffiti marks or again maybe pseudo inscriptions. We are not certain about the actual nature of the script, but it's difficult to understand whether these actually represent the pre-Ashokan state of Brahmi. Richard Solomon suggested that these are results of stratigraphic intrusion, but if we accept the stratigraphy proposed by Cunningham and Olchin, we'll have to accept that the Anuradhapura pottery offers the earliest evidence of Brahmi in South Asia. So, if we summarize the issue of antiquity, there are two schools. One is in favor of pre-Ashokan antiquity of Brahmi. The other one is for the Ashokan antiquity, that is, Brahmi is dated in the 3rd century BC. Now, if we look at the history of decipherment of the script, we all know that Charles Wilkins was the first scholar who published an inscription from South Asia. It was in 1788 that in the Asiatic Researches, the Journal of the Asiatic Society at Kolkata, Charles Wilkins had published 2 inscriptions. Incidentally, both of these were from Bengal. One was a copper plate inscription, the other one was a stone inscription, and both of these were dated in the 9th and the 11th century. So both of them were early medieval inscriptions written in Siddhamatrika or Gauri characters. But Wilkins published these 2 as the first published epigraphic evidence of South Asia. Then, after James Prinsep joined as the assistant assay master of the Calcutta Mint, he started studying the ancient coins preserved in the mint and the biscriptual legends of these coins. If we see this photograph of the coin, where we can see on the obverse side the Greek inscription, while on the reverse the Koroshti inscription. This way, Prinsep could compare the data from known to unknown, and in this way he deciphered both Brahmi and Koroshti in 1837, although we have to remember that another person had also parallelly deciphered Koroshti, as Richard Solomon has recently reconstructed. He was G.F. Grotefend's son, T.L. Grotefend. He had also parallelly deciphered at least the Koroshti script, but it is the name of Prinsep that you all know. Of course, for Brahmi, it is the credit of Prinsep alone to have deciphered that script. If we look at the issue of origin of this Brahmi script, the precise origin of the Brahmi script, like many other issues with writing in early India, it has been a major debate of Indian epigraphy ever since its decipherment by Prinsep. Again, scholars dealing with the origin of this script, as it is the case with many of the origin theories in different branches of study, here also the scholars working on the origin of the Brahmi script are divided into 2 camps. One camp is for the Indian origin, while the other camp advocates for the extraneous derivation or extraneous origin or foreign origin. The most early theory on the origin of Brahmi, which was given by Alexander Cunningham, was that Brahmi originated from a pictographic logographic script. To the left, you can see the Brahmi letter Kha. Cunningham suggested that this letter Kha had developed from the pictographic representation of a mattock. The picture to the right is that of a modern hoe or mattock. Cunningham believed that since the functional attribute of a mattock is to dig, which in Sanskrit means khan, the letter Kha originated from this etymology of khan, which is the function of a mattock. But unfortunately, with this theory, Cunningham was not able to demonstrate the whole set of letters in the Brahmi script, and therefore it was not accepted naturally. Gauri Shankar Hirachand Ojha was the most major scholar talking about the origin of the Brahmi script from India. Some other scholars following him have proposed that Brahmi had originated during the time of the composition of the Veda, as you can see here in this quote from R.B. Pandey's work, that it was invented by the genius of the Indian people who were far ahead of other peoples of ancient times in linguistics, etc. That's how scholars of one group suggested that Brahmi had originated in India. One group again connected the origin of the script with the Harappan script. And here, S. Langdon was the first scholar to suggest this theory in 1931, followed by G.R. Hunter and most significantly, D.C. Sarkar. And this theory was based on two grounds. One is the point of diacritical modification of the Brahmi script, and the second characteristic was the subjoining of symbols in the Brahmi script. On these two grounds, they devised this theory. Here is an illustration of how they proposed this theory. To the left, you can see two different characteristics of Brahmi. At the top is a diacritical modification of the letter Na, and at the bottom is the joining of the two letters Ka and Ya. If you look at the Harappan script, the same two characteristics. At the top, you have one symbol being diacritically modified by adding one or two lines with it, while the two sets of symbols at the bottom represent joining of symbols. A net, then a man with a net. A stick, then a man with a stick, denoting completely different meanings. Therefore, these two sets of similarities are precise in both Harappan and Brahmi script. By this, we by no means suggest that Brahmi had its origin from the Harappan script, but these two systemic similarities cannot be denied. This is also a fact, as suggested by Sarkar and other scholars. Now, if we turn to the theory of foreign origin, the earliest scholar who talked about the foreign origin was James Prinsep, who suggested that Brahmi originated from Greek script. But here, Prinsep could not demonstrate the whole Brahmi script through its derivation from Greek. A modified theory was then more refined and modified theory was then given by Harry Falk under influence from James Hallevy, that Brahmi was basically based on the model of Koroshthi but with secondary influence from Greek. The scholars working on the foreign origin of Brahmi are again divided into two groups. One group of scholars, they suggest that Brahmi originated from the South Semitic group of scripts, while the other group suggests that it developed from the North Semitic group. If we detail now the South Semitic origin of Brahmi, some early scholars suggested that the South Arabic Himyaritic script was responsible for the origin of Brahmi. But of course, they could not offer a systematic pattern of derivation for this. Later, it was in 1875 that François Lenormand suggested that Brahmi originated from a different South Semitic script. For this South Semitic script, he talked about the Sabian script and suggested that Brahmi was a derivation from this. This theory was further developed by W. Dick in 1877. Although the South Semitic origin of Brahmi, this specific theory has its own merit, but it has two major problems. One is it cannot explain the entire structure of the Brahmi script through a process of derivation from Sabian. Of course, some of the letters like Brahmi Ba or Brahmi Ma, these can be directly, or the Brahmi Ya, these can be directly derived from the Sabian, but the other letters cannot be derived in this way of paleographic comparison as these scholars suggested. This is number one. And second limitation of this theory is these scholars have put more emphasis on the direction of writing, that is, whether Brahmi is written from left to right or right to left, instead of looking at the systemics of the script. That's why the South Semitic derivation theories on Brahmi were questioned by later scholars who proposed an alternative in the light of North Semitic alphabets. Here again, the scholars talking in favor of the North Semitic derivation of Brahmi are divided into two groups. The earlier group is talking in favor of Phoenician being the actual progenitor, and the latter talking about Aramaic being the earlier or the inspiration for the Brahmi script. If we look at the Phoenician, Ulrich Friedrich Kopp was the first scholar who proposed this derivation in 1821 in the form of a comparative table of letters in both Phoenician and Brahmi. Of course, this table was his arguments were further buttressed by supplementary evidences like continuous connections with the Phoenician world and so on. It was later by Albrecht Weber in 1856 that this theory was elaborated. And finally, at the end of the 19th century, George Wooler, one of the pioneering scholars of Indian paleography, he wrote his famous On the Origin of the Indian Brahmo Alphabet, and he criticized severely the South Semitic origin of the Brahmi script and suggested that Phoenician should be the actual alternative. But here again, the problem lies in the fact that none of these scholars, they could provide a complete comparative list of the letters in Phoenician and Brahmi. But the major limitation of this theory is again that these scholars could not provide a complete comprehensive list of letters in both the scripts and they could not demonstrate that each of the letter forms they developed from a Phoenician precursor type. The second North Semitic school that talks about origin of Brahmi is led by A.C. Burnell as early as 1874, who presented an alternative version where he suggested that instead of Phoenician, we should look into the Aramaic script to find the precursor or the inspiration of the Brahmi script. It was later elaborated more recently in 1948 by David Dieringer in his famous book Alphabet. But Richard Salomon, as we can see here, finally argued of one of his observations is this statement where he writes that if the hypothesis of the innovation of Brahmi under Ashoka's sponsorship is correct, this recreation may be attributed to the emperor's desire to invent a distinct imperial script, perhaps under the inspiration of Old Persian cuneiform, which would be suited to the promulgation of edicts in written form. And this is a quite reasonable suggestion because as we know that the Mauryan world and the Persian world were in close connection from a very early date, and we have clear evidences in art historical objects that Mauryan art was largely influenced by the Persian art. So as part of culture, the writing systems of Mauryan India could have been well inspired and influenced by the Persian system of writing, and it might have had its inspiration from Old Persian cuneiform. We still do not know how Brahmi originated, but if we are to summarize the theories on the origin of Brahmi, this is the scenario. We have, on one hand, a set of two theories. One is from an origin from Greek, and then a theory of origin from Koroshthi via Greek. Then we have the South Semitic and the North Semitic groups, which are again divided into Himyaritic and Sabian, and the North Semitic into Phoenician and Aramaic. And finally, we may now turn to the characteristic features of writing in early India. First of all, this has been called by Richard Solomon a diacritically modified syllabic type of script. Secondly, as we all know, this is written from left to right. Sometimes, as you can see here, semi-bostropheron, that is in mixed direction, the Brahmi script is used in inscriptions. We can recall here the case of the Yeragudi inscription of Ashoka, where we have some lines written from right to left, while majority of the lines or sentences are written from left to right. Then we have a composition in this script of initial vowels, consonants with aspirated, unaspirated, nasal, semi-vowel and sibilant sounds. Then we have 6 full vowels, 32 consonants, 8 medial vowel diacritic signs, the Anuswara signs, and this whole set with all these forms, the Brahmi of the Ashokan period is a uniform script. It is interesting to find that the medial vowels in the earliest stage of writing in India, they follow a certain set of formulae, which we do not find in later inscriptions. In later inscriptions, there are several variations of this formulae that we find in the earliest inscriptions. But again, we have to remember that there is a general standard version of the pattern of writing medial vowels, which is found in all Indian writings, even the different derivatives of the Brahmi. And then conjuncts and ligatures are formed by joining 2 or more symbols, as in the Harappan script or even in modern Indian scripts. The orthography of the Brahmi script is not properly developed and standardized, and the vowel lengths can be extended, as again in the Harappan script, the vowel length can be extended by diacritical modifications. If we remember the earlier slide where we saw that a symbol can be diacritically modified into a different one, this is a characteristic of both Brahmi and protohistoric script. To summarize, we have to remember that the Brahmi is the earliest of all the scripts of historical India, as known from documentary evidence, besides Koroshthi. And then we have to remember that the terminology of Brahmi, the name Brahmi, is debated. Finally, D.C. Sarkar suggested that instead of talking in terms of the dynastic terminologies, we should name the script in terms of their generic name nomenclatures like early, middle and late Brahmi. The earliest reference to the term Brahmi is found in a Buddhist text called Lalitavistara. Then if we look at the issue of antiquity, we find that some scholars proposed its connection with protohistoric writing system, and most significantly D.C. Sarkar is there in that list, who suggested that there is some connection with the script with the Harappan script. Then again, like many other antiquity theories, the antiquity of Brahmi is also debated. One school is for a post-Ashokan antiquity of Brahmi, the other one for the pre-Ashokan antiquity. The origin of the script, as we have just seen, is again debated. There are several schools, one propagating the theory of indigenous origin, the other advocating the foreign origin of script. Even in these two different schools of indigenous and extraneous origin, there are sub-schools who talk of different regions as being responsible for the development of what we see in Ashokan Brahmi. And finally, we have just seen that the script has a set of specific characteristics which are salient to it. And for more information, please visit EPG Pathshala and the e-text available there.